Right. Okay. So live broadcast. Hopefully, normally something goes on Facebook to say that it's. I'm trying to check Facebook as well. I've registered for Facebook and it says going live. So let's just go, because I've got to post this anyway in PSA South East. All right. So welcome. It's really good to talk to you. I'm really looking forward to Tuesday when you're speaking about finding your story, Rikki. So thank you for joining us here on this live session.
My pleasure.
Good. Right, the first thing that I wanted to ask you, because of your really interesting history of starting PSA, this organisation, I wanted to ask you, and really, if there were any difficulties, how difficult it was getting momentum, and how it all started.
Oh, yeah. I mean, in actual fact, it probably took about, well, it did take about nearly 4 years to get the PSA up. I've been quite active in the life insurance. I was actively working in the life insurance industry. I was speaking about technology, and I'd been very actively involved also with the Institute of Sales and Marketing Management that had had a bit of a resurgence. Somebody I knew from the LIA had moved across, and I got involved with that. So I was speaking around the Institute of Sales and Marketing Management regions. I was speaking around the Life Insurance Association regions, speaking at most of their conferences and conventions on a regular basis. And it was really irritating me that most of the keynote speakers that were brought in were from America or from Australia. And there was almost no UK speakers, and we just didn't have a speaking industry. All of the bureaus were largely working with explorers, adventurers, celebrities, entertainers, some of the top business professionals, people like John Harvey Jones, and that was mainly what was going on. If you didn't have a name, you just didn't get onto the books for the bureaus. They were not at all happy when we started setting up the PSA, to be honest. Because then the bureaus tended to work on the basis that their USP was they had the phone numbers of the speakers that you wanted. Yeah. So if you wanted the speaker, you had to go through them, otherwise you couldn't reach them. And that's very much how it worked, where we were promoting speakers, saying, come and find your speaker, and you can, encouraging people to promote themselves. But anyway, there was no UK market, and I'd spoken to a friend of mine at Toastmasters who said you should join the NSA. I said, what's the NSA? So I found out about that, joined the NSA in 95, and I started speaking. There were only 6 NSA members, so I spoke to them, and one of them said, you've got to go to the convention. So off I went to Minneapolis, and that was the turning point for me, because I'd been to lots and lots of conventions before, but my God, NSA was just something else. It was 2,500 speakers, 13 concurrent sessions, and you're sitting down around the table with there's Ty Boyd, there's Bill Gove, there's Cavett Robert, Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, and these people who had sort of inspired me all my life were now sitting at lunch with me and chatting over and sharing all their secrets. And I thought, I couldn't believe it. Yeah. All the top keynote speakers that I'd met from all the previous conventions were there. Warren Gresham, Tony Alessandro, and that. And I came back really enthused and thought, right, let's set up an NSA chapter. But it was so hard. NSA wanted us to have at least 50 members. The fees for NSA were like $350 a year. And I just couldn't get anybody interested in the idea. It was all too expensive, not enough benefit in the UK. And I'd spoken, there was Alan Lord who I'd spoken to. He had an idea for trying to set up something in the UK, just didn't get the momentum. And it was really a couple of years later that a friend of mine, Brendan Power, who had also enthused about it, ended up in San Francisco and attended one of the chapter meetings there. He came back as buzzy as me and said, "Now I now understand why this has to be done. We've got to do it." And he was the one who really pushed me and said, "Come on, you've got the contacts. You can get this." So by the time we got to 97, 98, I'd pulled together a few people. I'd been to a few more NSA conventions. The NSA was now looking at creating the International Federation, and Warren Evans was really supporting us. Somebody else in the UK, Rex Warner, who was an adventurer. He's does stupid things. He sailed a raft across the Pacific Ocean in shark-infested water, and he can't even swim. I mean, it just nothing. Brendan, although he's in financial services, used to be a pirate radio station DJ. So we had a pretty interesting mix of people, and drew them all in. Philip Campani, who was a friend of mine from Toastmasters, he constantly beat me in all the competitions and got himself to become number 2 in the World Championship. So we pulled all this together, and we started to get some momentum. We originally were going to launch in October 98, but timing just didn't work, and we missed the date. So finally we went for January 1999. Millennium Gloucester Hotel. We got 120 people to that first meeting. We launched it, and almost half of them signed up immediately on the spot. So that's it. We'd funded it just with the directors putting in a couple of years membership fees, but everybody joined. It was we said, right, you got 18 months for the first membership. They joined. The second meeting attracted some more, and I think we were up to about 120, 150 members by the time we got to the end of the first year. So once we got going, it wasn't very difficult to actually get other people interested, because it was like an idea whose time had come.
Yeah,
people needed it. There wasn't that support. There wasn't that way to get connected with people, and suddenly it was there. And if you speak to a lot of people like Nigel Risner and Paul, name's gone for a minute. There are quite a lot of speakers who will admit that the PSA is what set them off. Frank Furness was doing a few speeches then, joined the PSA, and by joining and getting connected into NSA, that's what launched him into being an international speaker. So a lot of top speakers now owe their careers to the fact that we got this going.
Right. Yeah. I've got 1,000 more questions around this subject. I'm going to hold them off until Tuesday.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of questions I want to ask you about this, and really also the future as well. But I've got to hold that off because I've got another question for you.
Okay.
What was the attitude of some people when you decided to change gender? I would imagine that you got quite a variety of attitudes.
It was interesting. I think the first thing was a bit of shock from people, because nobody knew. It was something that I had never let anyone know. I'd kept it a deep, dark secret, and it was one of those things where I wasn't planning to do. I'd never planned to do it. When I did tell a few people that what was going to happen, I was actually about to become the president of the Global Speaking Federation, and as a result of coming out, within 6 months, my speaking career at that time came to a stop, absolute dead stop, and nobody would book me. Within the PSA, I think that the thing about the PSA on the NSA is that there's always been a very, very strong policy of diversity, of accepting everyone for who they are. And I think we have to do that within the speaking industry, because a lot of the time when people become speakers, it's because they have a different story, an interesting story. And, trans people tend to be a bit quiet, we keep ourselves hidden, mostly because of the rubbish that we can get from other people. I still think I think there were not everybody was happy about the idea. I think that suddenly the founder of the PSA was a trans woman. That was uncomfortable, and I understood that. I stepped down from the Global Speaking Federation partly because I suddenly wasn't generating the level of income I needed to do that, because you've got to go to all the conventions, and partly because I did get a sense that people weren't comfortable. Not everybody, but one or two people were not particularly comfortable with that. It was all a bit new. We hadn't really had that sort of breakthrough tipping point that came about in 2015 with Caitlyn Jenner. And I went off to university to do my degree, and by 2007, I'd become a social entrepreneur, and my speaking career, to a degree, I was still speaking, I was still doing a lot of training, but my speaking had largely sort of gone onto the back burner. It was very hard to get booked as a trans woman. It's beginning to pick up now, but I suppose I moved more into a field of doing training and keynotes and that whole diversity field, which is it's not the best paying marketplace, but it's one that's been very interesting. I've enjoyed the work I've done, so it's enabled me to survive. But my career would have been, I think, totally different, because I was a technology speaker at a time when technology was literally taking off. So for me, it was a quite dramatic shift of direction, and to a degree, I backed away and sort of went a bit quiet from the PSA for quite a while, because I had there were a few incidents that were uncomfortable, but that was me learning how to tread a difficult path.
Yeah. I've done a lot of work in diversity. In fact, it was work in ethnic diversity, and this was in the kind of early and mid 1990s. And I think that the UK has gone back a good 20 years from perhaps 2000, when things changed greatly. But it seems to be that it's slowly coming back onto the agenda. It's mainly focused around gender rather than anything else. Female, women on boards, and all of that. But do you get a sense that wider diversity is coming back again? The conversation.
I think so. The biggest problem that happened here, to be honest, was the fact that the Equality Act, which in the UK was the biggest driver for equalities, and I'd been very actively involved in contributing to the creation of that. In support, I worked a lot with the Equality and Human Rights Commission right there in the run up to to that becoming law. But of course, it got royal assent in May 2010. And promptly the government changed. So all of a sudden the Equality Act was handed over to the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives to implement, having been the flagship agenda for the Labour Party. And not everybody agreed with what was in there. There were people who didn't like some of the tools. So rather than sort of battle it, I think what they've done is just shoved it onto the back burner and just pushed it to the background and not allowed it to be a big issue. The Equality and Human Rights Commission was shrunk down to a fraction of its original size, so it no longer had the power to implement and to penalise companies for not complying with the Act. At the same time, I think what we're seeing now, we've seen this really nice program that Richard Branson and a few others are involved in. I've forgotten the name of that one now, but and they've done a little video which is really about businesses saying, look, LGBT inclusion is absolutely critical. And I think that's the change I'm seeing. I was reading Charlotte Sweeney's book the other day, and she's put a book together on inclusive leadership, and it's inclusion where the shift has happened. We've moved from equality and diversity into inclusion. Now, inclusion requires awareness, so helping people understand different cultures is helpful. The whole issue with terrorism, it hasn't helped. That's built up a huge undercurrent of bias here. And I noticed that, I mean, even today, I've been on Radio Humberside this morning because a trans woman in Manchester was refused access to the female changing rooms in a Topshop store, complained, and Topshop said, "Okay, fine, we're going gender neutral. All our changing rooms will be for everybody," and everybody's kicked off about that. So what's interesting is as we've dealt with the law, what we're now dealing with is a much more difficult challenge. How do you tackle acceptance? How do you tackle people accepting diversity? And that's a much, much bigger challenge. So I think that's why it's coming back online. People are beginning to realize that companies that have a very diverse staff that actually encourage and include people from all different areas actually are more profitable.
Yes.
Than those companies that don't. And that's what we're beginning to see, is that you can't ignore it anymore because it's actually hitting the bottom line. And so slowly, and I think that's been the hard thing, slowly the large corporates are beginning to tackle it, especially those which are multinational, where they've got huge organizations in other parts of the world. So they've got organizations in Muslim countries. They've got organizations in Africa, and they can't allow anyone in any part of their organization to be discriminatory. It just doesn't work. So it's going to be interesting. So we shall see how we go.
I certainly think it is. But one thing that makes me feel quite positive about this subject is that the alpha generation, the millennials, is kind of almost not a non-issue, really.
Yeah, it is.
Completely different attitude, and also because of people are so much more connected globally, then a lot of these issues or barriers that we see now hopefully will just fade away because it becomes a non-issue, and the kind of old guard is moving on, passing on.
No, well, I think you're right. I mean, in Hull, for example, when I moved to Hull in 2001, the BME community, the Black Minority Ethnic community, represented less than 2% of the population, and almost entirely was made up from Chinese families who owned the Chinese restaurants and Indian families who owned all the Indian restaurants, with some a fairly large Polish community as well. Mostly because they'd come over here, around about the time of the war and didn't get any further. But because Hull's not on the way to anywhere, you have to come here. And what we had was a whole load of empty houses. So when the Kosovo, the Balkan crisis started, suddenly loads of migrants came in from that. And then, they've been coming in from Africa, from the Congo. So all of a sudden now we've gone from 2% to 10%. Now that shifted the face of the high street. You walk down the high street now, and it's a multicultural high street. Where you walk down the high street, 20 years ago, it was all white, all Hull. So that's changing. That people are being now, because what that's affected is that all of those kids who are the millennial kids, the kids who've grown up through that, have grown up going to school and finding that they've got people from all over the world in their class with them, and they're getting to know them, and they've got friends from different places, and they're just friends. It's just people.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. That is absolutely wonderful, and it's a shame that our corporates and our businesses don't view it the same way. That this is a beautiful melting pot and a huge opportunity.
Actually, I remember a really funny story. As a friend of mine was talking to his daughter about a school photograph. And said, "Which is your friend Samantha?" She said, "It's the one in the yellow jumper." And he's looking around trying to find the one in the yellow jumper. And he said, "You mean the black girl?"
Yeah, that's the difference.
That was it. to his daughter, it was the one in the yellow jumper. She
Yeah.
didn't even consider the idea that she was one of the few black children in the picture. So it was
Yeah, beautiful. Right, as I have to talk to you about speaking, because you've got 30 years of experience, and we've got to be real. And I think that the PSA as well has come round to understanding that actually it's only a small percentage of people that earn their money through keynotes. A lot of it's the consultants, the trainers, the coaches, the people that have a story, or the business owners. They're the ones that are actually the bulk of people that are actually speaking. And so you're speaking back on Tuesday is finding your story. So I wanted to ask you, why is this so important?
Well, I've battled with this one because people have been saying to me, "Oh, you should be telling your story," and I thought, no, and I wasn't getting that our stories are so important, and yet all of my speeches have always been full of stories. Now, one of the real success stories that I've seen within the PSA has been Richard McCann, and I've seen him speaking a couple of times, and he's nearby and local, so we know we've sort of become friends. But Richard has built himself up to be one of the most successful speakers in the UK. And he speaks an unbelievable. I couldn't even do his pace of speaking. I mean, my God, I keep seeing his notes on LinkedIn, and he's all over the country. He's just constantly mad dashing everywhere. But it's all based upon his story. And that's all it is. His keynote, he's turned basically his story around. Initially, it was just about his story. Then, as he got more successful, it was how successful I'd been, and now he's picked out the I Can thing. So increasingly, I've started to look. So a couple of years ago, somebody asked me if I'd do something online on storytelling. I said, well, I've not really done anything on, but sure. And so I started studying storytelling and looking at it. And I've always been interested in writing. My partner's a writer, and I've started to understand just how critical storytelling is. And then obviously I've always been a big fan of TED Talks, and I started to realize that the success of the TED Talks is actually about, if you look at the very successful ones, it's always about stories. It's people with an amazing story to tell about something they've done, their achievements that they've had, something personal, where they've overcome some personal challenge. But you start to realize that the critical difference between a speaker and a trainer is that we have to have as speakers unique information. We have to have a unique presentation that nobody else can do. And I don't want somebody to take my story and go and tell it somewhere else. I've seen that done disastrously by speakers who've grabbed the story from Norman Peel and retold that story. If I tell my story, it's really, really hard for someone to take that material and retell it as if it's theirs. They can't do it. They haven't had that personal experience. They haven't been through that backdrop. And in any case, my story will come across with a passion and a connection that you cannot get if it's not your story. So that is what I've realized. And so the key for any speaker is to look at their story, at how their story works, and find the way to use that. So the thing I decided back when I changed my gender was because no one would book me because I was transgender. So I thought, right, what do I need to speak about so that people will book me because I'm transgender?
Yeah.
And that came to gender, because what I suddenly realized is as I changed gender, certain things were happening. I was beginning to notice the way women were treated and discriminated against that women didn't notice. Mm-hmm. And women didn't notice it because that's the way it's always been.
Every day.
Just the way it is. Mm-hmm. People would say things like, oh, well, welcome to womanhood. No, I'm not accepting that. Okay, so, and also men say, oh, men don't have privilege. Well, when you've just lost it, they do. So I experienced the losing of that male privilege, that instant acceptance. And then I suddenly find people say, well, you're a bit aggressive. You're a bit, I'm thinking, oh, no. It's no different to what I was before. I never tried to play around my voice. I changed my voice. So I decided that was not going to happen. I just present a different way. And slowly people are beginning to accept that, okay, fine, it's okay for anyone to present any way they want. But I keep noticing these things about different ways in which women present. And it's because what's positive for a man becomes negative when a woman tries to copy it. What's positive for a woman becomes negative when a man tries to copy it. And we have this the binary divide is so rigid that it's actually undermines, particularly, it really works badly against women, but it actually also works badly against men because they're locked into a very narrow area of presentation. It's like always has to be suits and ties, where women can be much more creative and much more playful with the way they present. So all these things are things I started to notice, and they all become part of my story. So and this is the great thing. As you go through life, you start seeing what's going on, looking around, beginning to be aware of what's changing, and that all becomes a part of your story. Right. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. Know Your Why. At the moment, I've just been listening to an audio book based upon his book, which is also based on his TED Talk, about getting to your why. Why do you do this? And the why is always about your story.
Yeah, fascinating. That's really good. You your presentation you're doing on Thursday, you're talking about how you can use your storytelling to inspire your audience to change behavior. So I'm really interested about that. How do you use the story to change behavior? How does that work?
That again, I don't want to sort of give too much away on my talk on this, but it's really about it's about your story tells us about how you got to where you are. Now, if you think about any story if you watch a movie, if you read a book, the key element to any story is conflict. That's the difference between a story and an anecdote. Anecdotes are interesting short stories, but they don't generally contain any conflict. It's just something that happened. It's interesting. It's funny. Sometimes you had to be there, but generally that's it. And we use anecdotes to illustrate, but stories are much more powerful, much longer. If anybody's ever been on one of Doug Stevenson's workshops, he's a master of helping people to develop their stories. But the biggest key is you have to have a conflict. There has to have been some big challenge that had to be overcome. And by overcoming that challenge and facing that challenge, and it might have taken a long, long time, but eventually you get to a resolution. And that's what inspires people. If people see the stories, so I've always said to people, if you became a millionaire very quickly and have lived a very, very wonderful life ever since then, nobody's really going to want to be interested. If you became a millionaire, lost it all, went bankrupt, and started again and built it up, then we want to know.
Yeah, true.
If you survived cancer, we want to hear how you survived cancer. What is it you've gone through? What challenges did you face? What did you battle through? I was watching the Pride of Britain Awards last night. I mean, those are just stories of people who've done amazing things, and most of them didn't think it was very amazing. They just did it. A little girl who saved her mum's life because she was, 4 years old, could phone 999 and actually tell the operator what was going on, enough to get everybody there. And you think, what an amazing story. But that's it. We've all got brilliant stories. We've all overcome challenges. We've all dealt with those challenges. And somewhere around, there's somebody else facing that same challenge right now, looking for an answer. And if they hear you, boom, there we go. The greatest thing I get back is when people 5, 10, 15 years later say, oh, I heard you speak 20 years ago, 15 years ago, changed my life.
Yeah.
There are a few people who've changed my life, a few people whose experiences just, made me take another direction. And that's what we want, isn't it? That's what we're all doing. That's why we do this thing. Yeah. That's why we're speakers.
Yeah. I think that's the perfect way to end this. Really inspirational. It's all about human connection, isn't it? And you've made me see stories in a different way. So I'm